fire that burns inside. We're the fire that burns inside. We are the freedom generation. Singing in mercy. You are the one who sets us on motion. Yours is the glory. There's a fire in our hearts and it burns for you. It's never gonna fade away. We are free. Yours is the glory. We are risen, living alive in you, and our passion will not die. No, our passion will not die, and nothing can stop us. We're running through the night, and our passion will not die. No, our passion will not die. We are the freedom generation, singing in mercy. You are the one who set us on motion. Yours is the glory. There's a fire in our hearts and it burns for you. It's never gonna fade away. We are free. Yours is the glory. We've been looking at the book of Job, trying to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? That's a tough question. We've tried to answer it, and we're going to keep looking at some of the things that surround the whole process. The big idea of the series in the book of Job, we've just kind of taken a snapshot of this book, is to provide comfort and encouragement to those experiencing difficult circumstances. And Sam shared last week how these sermon series, we plan them out about a year ahead. And that helps us to stay focused. It helps the praise team to pick the songs that are appropriate with the sermon for that day, and things like that. And we don't know what the future holds. And of course, if I knew that the sermon series was going to go that well, that's a God thing. That's not a me thing. But the Lord allowed us to go through this series at a very appropriate time. But, you know, even if we hadn't gone through what we've gone through these last few weeks, it's always a good message. Because at some time or another, every one of us will experience some difficulty in our life. In the first week, we looked at the topic of suffering. And in the second week, we looked at the purpose of suffering. Last week, we talked about having a support system and dealing with some doubt and depression and stuff. Today, we're going to look at something that I've always said and fits in real well with this: walking towards God in the midst of suffering, not away.
Amen.
And then next week, we'll look at the final part in the series about God's sovereignty. Trusting God because we know that God is in control. So this morning, as we look at Job, we're going to look at Job chapter 27. We're going to talk about no excuses, is basically the message title, No Excuses. Talking about staying close to God. The big idea of the message this morning is simple. Don't use suffering as an excuse to walk away from God. Let me say that again. Don't use suffering as an excuse to walk away from God.
Amen.
So we've been looking at the series trying to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And it's a very difficult question to actually answer because there's so many things that go into that. But this morning I want to just share with you a little bit, first of all, from a book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in 1969, when she identified what are known as, and I think it's universally known now, the 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are the 5 stages of grief. The crazy thing about these 5 stages, you know, these are sort of in order, but you can get to the 3rd one and then go back to the 1st one. Or you can get to the 4th one and then fall back to the 2nd one. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. Everybody will go through grief differently. We will all react differently to the exact same suffering, to the exact same situation. We will all have different responses. And so part of the purpose of the message isn't just to encourage you, but to help you to encourage others, to allow them to go through that process in their own way. So I want us to look at each one of these just briefly as we get into the message. In Job chapter 27, this is part of his speech. If you remember the story, Job is a very wealthy man, has a lot of children, has a lot of property, has a lot of animals, livestock, which was a measure of wealth. And in one day, he loses all his wealth, he loses all his children. At the end of the day, Job worships God. Doesn't curse God, just worships God. Then something else happens to Job. The one thing that he had left was his health. And his health was taken away. And he suffered with these severe boils all over his body. And used a rock to scrape the scabs off. I guess it was itchy and painful. And his wife told him, you know, why don't you just curse God and die? Just get it over with. You might as well just give up. His friends show up. He has several friends. And they show up and they're trying to comfort him. In fact, we've got to give them some pointers, okay? We've got to give them some points for actually showing up. There's a couple of things that Job's friends actually did right. One, they showed up. And the Bible says that they just sat in silence for 7 days, I think it was. They just sat there with Job, just kind of didn't say a word, just kind of sat with him while he was going through this. And the second thing that they did right was that they listened. They just listened. You know, Job wanted to express himself. Now, when Job's friends decided to open their mouth and offer advice, that's when they got in trouble, okay? Remember that, okay? This is important. When somebody has suffered loss, they don't need you to show up with theological excuses. They don't need you to show up and defend God. They don't need you to show up and give them the answer to the tough questions. They just need you to show up. And they just need you to listen. That's it. And, you know, having unfortunately gone through a lot of funerals as a minister and personally in family, People say the dumbest things in funerals, don't they? I mean, they say, you know, how there's not a lot more violence in funerals, I don't understand. Really. I personally have wanted to affect violence on several people at a funeral. Because they say some of the dumbest things, and you're like, what? I'm going to put you in that casket with that person. I mean, it's just awful, some of the things people say. And I think it's because we don't know what to say. And so remember this, just show up, hug them, and say, I'm so very sorry for your loss. That's it, done. No cute poems, no cute phrases. Don't try to tell them why God took their loved one. You know, God picked the flower, and God did this, and God needed somebody to sing. You know, somebody said one time, you know, your mom died, you know, God needed someone to sing in his choir. I said, he hadn't heard my mom sing. I'm sorry. No, that's dumb. My mom, bless her heart, she couldn't carry a tune. She couldn't sing. So when somebody tells you that, you're like, God can create anything he wants. Why would he take my mother? Because he wanted another voice in the part. It doesn't make sense, people. Okay, you know where I'm going. Let me get off my horse now. We say some of the craziest things. So let's look at a couple of things this morning. Job is responding, and his friends they begin to accuse him of, well, you know, your kids died because they were living in sin, and the reason you've suffered so much because you must have some secret sin. And Job says, no, I'm telling you, I didn't do anything. I've tried to do right. I've tried to live right. I've tried to serve God. And so chapter 27 is part of Job's final speech where he's just kind of talking. I'm going to read a little bit of it. Job continued speaking, Job 27, verse 1. I vow by the living God who has taken away my rights, by the Almighty who has embittered my soul, as long as I live, while I have breath from God, my lips will speak no evil, and my tongue will speak no lies. I will never concede that you are right, he's telling his friends. I will defend my integrity until I die. I will maintain my innocence without wavering. My conscience is clear for as long as I live. May my enemy be punished like the wicked, and my adversary like those who do evil. For what hope do the godless have when God cuts them off and takes away their life? Will God listen to their cry when trouble comes upon them? Can they take delight in the Almighty? Can they call to God at any time? I will teach you about God's power. I will not conceal anything concerning the Almighty. But as you have seen all this, you say all these useless things to me. I mean, they're trying to comfort. They really are. They're trying to comfort him. But they're more interested in defending God, defending God's honor. They're more interested in, you know, how many of you growing up, men, you know, maybe your dad or somebody told you, men don't cry or boys don't cry.
Walk it off.
Huh?
Walk it off.
Walk it off. Shake it off. Walk it off.
Stiffen the upper lip.
Stiffen the upper lip. You know, when they said, los hombres no deben de llorar, that's what my parents would tell me, los hombres no deben de llorar. Means men are not supposed to cry. Well, then quit beating me. Hello? Problem solved, folks. Quit taking that belt off and whipping the fire out of me. I know I'm in trouble, but goodness gracious.
Mama did in the syllables.
Yeah, Mama would get that, go give me a stick from that oleander bush. And being the dumb, naive, youngest one in the family, I was the one to go find the nicest one and I knew what she was going to use for it. I picked all the leaves off it. Man, well, this is a nice one, right? She's going to get my brother Tony, or she's going to get Joel. She's going to whack David. Man, this is going to be good. And I'd run back to Mom and give her that switch. Guess the first one who got hit? Yeah, you guessed it. Lord have mercy. If I would have known that, I would have said, go get your own switch. I'm not going to do that. I ain't crazy. She hit me with a broom once, so she didn't really need a switch, okay? So as we look at this process of denial and anger, all the stuff that we just kind of went through, number one, here's some things I want to help you with. Number one, give yourself permission to grieve. In his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, Tim Keller says this: no matter what precautions we take, no matter how well we have put together a good life, no matter how hard we have worked to be healthy, wealthy, comfortable with friends and family, and successful with our career, something will inevitably ruin it. You see, we also suffer loss. Loss is inevitable. It comes to every single person. It's the loss of a loved one, the loss of our health, the loss of our dignity, loss of a dream, the loss of a job, the loss of finances, loss of a home to fire or flood or other. And so we try to comfort somebody. Maybe they hadn't suffered the death of a loved one, but they've suffered something in a flood or a fire. And we try to encourage them, and we say, well, at least you're still alive. Okay, thanks. Thank God, yeah. At least I'm not dead, right? And what we do by saying things like that is we are minimizing their pain and their suffering. Right? We minimize it. And what we need to do is not to minimize their pain. We need to embrace them and just love them. Because loss comes in so many areas of our life. And so it may be different. Of course, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a brother or a sister or a child can be one of the most difficult things that you would ever have to go through. But that doesn't mean that when you have to give up on a dream that you've had all your life since you were a child, and you realize one day when you get up to be around my age and you realize, that's not going to happen. You know, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And you have to give up on that dream. Or when you are handed a pink slip and you have to give up on that career. Or when, something happens and unexpectedly and everything changes. A divorce is devastating. The loss of the way things were. And so, it may be different. We're not supposed to go out there and try to compare my pain to your pain. Oh, well, you don't know. You just, okay, so you lost a few things. No, it hurts. We need to acknowledge the hurt. We need to acknowledge the pain. It's horrible. Driving over to get to my house, it's like driving through a war zone, and my heart aches. Every time I drive through there and I say a prayer, every time I drive through there inside of me, I say, Lord, help my neighbors, encourage them, give them the strength. As I see piles and piles of their furniture and their belongings and their carpet and their pictures, and just sitting on the sidewalk for days. I say, God, give them strength. They've lost so much. Yes, they're alive and they're well, and there wasn't a loss of life, but it's still a loss, and it's still something that hurts, and there's pain there. I know it's just stuff, but it's your stuff. It's stuff that you're invested in. It's stuff that belongs to you. It's stuff that you work hard, or it's stuff that's sentimental stuff to you, and it's important to you and to you. And so we have to understand that when people go through things like that, that we validate their suffering and validate their pain and their hurt. And just love on them and listen to them and not criticize or demean or belittle. We all suffer loss, and loss is inevitable, but we also need to learn how to grieve at our own pace, because we all respond differently to loss. While we all go through the stages of grief, we will all do so at our own pace and in our own ways. I'm not going to go through it at your timetable. You said, Pastor, you've grieved long enough for that. Well, that's not for you to say. That's between me and God. Because we all do it differently. And so I want to say to you, give others a space that they need to grieve in their own way. Don't judge others too quickly for their loss or the way that they handle their loss. Don't minimize it, but rather they need to have their loss validated. And then they need somebody who will just listen and understand and imagine just how difficult, I've never had to go through something like that, but I can imagine how difficult it must be. And so we need to love and encourage one another in those times. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, in the ESV, it says it this way, But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul was suffering an illness. He calls it a thorn in his flesh. And just going through the scriptures, you kind of pick up a little bit. He had some issue with his eyes. And at one point he tells one of the churches in one of the letters, he says, when I came to you, you didn't reject me because of my illness. And in fact, he says to them, some of you, if you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me. So he had something wrong with his eyes, and he was hard to look at. Now, whether that was the thorn in the flesh, was it a physical, I don't know. But it certainly would fit the picture when he cries out to God and says, God, you really need to take this away from me. How can I preach the gospel and share the word when I've got this issue that keeps creeping up? And so he began to understand that God was not going to take that away, that it was not going to go away. And so the scripture he writes, and God says to him, my grace is sufficient for you. Because when you're weak, I will be very powerful. And so the Apostle Paul, in the midst of his weakness, in the midst of his own suffering, was able to glorify God and give God all the glory and all the credit for everything that was going on in his life. So give yourself permission to grieve. Second, grief for all of us is always full of questions. It's always full of questions. Frederick Buechner said this, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. I like that quote just because of the visual that I got of it. Doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and keep it moving. Eugene Peterson said, belief in God does not exempt us from feelings of abandonment by God. Praising God does not inoculate us from doubts about God. Grief is full of questions, it's full of confusion, it's full of doubts. We begin to question our salvation. We begin to question our situation. Why did this illness have to happen? Why did they have to give me that diagnosis? Why has this happened to me? Why now? When I was planning this or planning that, why did this have to happen? We begin to question our faith. Where is God in all of this? If you've ever been hurt in church, and if you've ever been in church at any length of time, and if you haven't gotten hurt in church, just hang around a little bit. Now, that's not our tagline for outreach for new members, okay? If you haven't been hurt at church, come to Faith Assembly. We'll fit you right into our schedule. Nobody's going to tell you that. They're going to tell you, oh, come be part of the family. Come belong. We want you to be part of the gang. You know, we want you to be here and be happy like the rest of us. Come on. No, we want you to be miserable like the rest of us. Because we're human and we're imperfect, and we're not a museum of saints. We're a hospital for sinners, and you got issues and I got issues. You know, and we're going to rub each other the wrong way sometimes, and things are going to happen. And if you've been in church any length of time, somebody's going to offend you. Somebody's going to say something about you, or not say anything to you, or not shake your hand, not invite you back. You know, whatever. They're not going to compliment your cooking on Wednesday, whatever it is. Because we're human, and that's part of the human experience. And so we said, well, I don't want to go there, you know, and I'm angry at God, I'm upset with God, and man, it's just not right, and why can't those people be perfect? And I think I'm going to leave this church, and I'm going to go down the street over to this other church, because I look at their videos, man, it looks perfect. I mean, they got it going on. You know, and you see these cute little video clips of this church down the road, and you're thinking, wow, they got great stuff happening. Yeah, but those are the clips that they saved, okay? They cut out. They cut out the bad clips. They're not going to show you the bad clips. Here's the day when Pastor showed up moody to church. But come anyway, because we're going to try and love you, okay? They're not going to do that. So we begin to question God, and why did God allow this to happen? Why didn't God heal them? And why didn't God deliver that person, my loved one? We begin to question ourselves. Maybe if I would have done this differently. Maybe if I would have done that. Maybe if I hadn't have done this. We begin to ask ourselves, how can I go on? Or what have I done to deserve this situation? Doubt and confusion is a normal part of the process. God always welcomes, listen to me, God welcomes your doubts. And He welcomes your questions. He's not afraid of your doubts. He's not afraid of your fears. He's not afraid of your confusion or your questions. He's not afraid of your anger. Because sometimes when we go through that process of grief, the 5 stages, part of that anger is we get mad at God. Well, why did you allow this? Why did you let this happen? Why did my loved one have to die? Why did my son have to die? Why did this have to happen? I thought that you were in control of everything. I thought that you permitted everything. And, you know, we'd say, you know, God allowed that to happen. Well, why? Why did He allow that to happen? And so Job is sitting there and his friends come around and Job is asking he's going through the process of mourning. He's going through the denial, the anger, the depression, he's going through that whole process. We see it in the book where he's just struggling with trying to find the why and work through the pain and the grief. And so Job's friends feel like, oh, okay, well, he's asking us why to go out there. So they start a theological discussion with him. He doesn't need a theological discussion. He just needs somebody to let him vent. And every now and then, you need to allow yourself to vent. And I know Veronica and I, we have discussions sometimes about things, and I'll tell her some things, and I sense myself getting angry, not at her, but at the situation, and I stop and I say, honey, I'm just venting. And she'll say, I know. That's it. That's all I need. I don't need her to tell me, well, you should do it that way, you should have said this, and you should have, whatever. I don't need advice. I just need a safe place to vent. Not like those college safe places. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. I need a relationship, and that's what my Veronica is to me. She's my safe place. That is my relationship that I have with her, that I can vent, and she's not going to think any less of me because I wanted to murder somebody at the church. In fact, sometimes she'll say, I'll hold him down for you. I mean, this is how we roll, okay? Nudge your neighbor, said, I think he's talking about you. Finally, in your grief, we need to trust God. You see, one of the biggest temptations that comes to our life when we're going through loss and we're going through grief is to walk away from God. Is to get so angry at God. We're so angry at God for allowing this to happen. We're so angry that God didn't intervene in some way, shape, or form, that God didn't move in a way that eliminated that person or that situation from ever taking place. I mean, I remember, and I've shared this before, but we lost our son. He was born too early, just by a couple of weeks, back in a time when the technology was not there to allow him to be saved. And to hold him in your arms and to have a little casket and go through that whole process is one of the most difficult times that Veronica and I have ever gone through. And my heart was crying out all those questions, all that anger. Why? Why? Why couldn't you have stopped it? Why couldn't we have done something different? Why, and I cried out to God for answers. I never got any answers. What I got was love. That's what I got, was love. And I remember one day, it was one of the most difficult days. Veronica had been in bed all day after that. And I was just wrestling with God all day, and people were coming and going. But there was this one sweet gentleman, Dr. Banador, a doctor from Nigeria. He came, and I couldn't tell you what we talked about because we didn't really talk about much. And he sat in my living room, just gentle and quiet. And I'm sure that I unvented on him, my anger, my frustration. He never said a word. He just sat there listening, nodding his head. When he left, he hugged me, prayed for me and Veronica, and left. That night, I was still wrestling and crying out to God, and I said, Lord, if I ever needed to see some supernatural proof that you exist, if I ever needed to see an angel, with my physical eyes, if I ever needed to see an angel come and minister help to me and my wife, today would be the day, God. This would be a good day for you to show up, because I need to see you. And I was angry with God because I felt like he didn't show up. He didn't come to the funeral. He didn't come to the mourning. He wasn't there with me. That's how I felt. And I was crying out to God and telling him that. Very gently, the Holy Spirit says, I was there the whole time, and I sent my angel. And his name was Dr. Vanderdoor. And his name was Richard Trotter, and Marcella Trotter. And he started naming all the people that had come to see us, that had been with us through that process, that had loved on us, that maybe didn't say anything, but just hugged us and wept with us for our loss. And so when you think of it that way, and you see somebody going through a time of loss, and you're saying, oh God, would you send them somebody? God is saying, yes, I'm sending you. You are my hands. You are my feet. You are my heart. You are my presence into that family, into that situation. While they're struggling and have questions, and they have doubt, they don't need your theology. They don't need to know about the 16 fundamental truths of the Assemblies of God. They don't need to know about that. They don't need for you to argue or try to defend God. They just need a safe place to vent. And they need somebody that will come alongside them and just love on them and embrace them and walk them through that. And so our greatest temptation, usually when we're going through this, is to walk away from God, and secondly, is to walk away from God's people. We have one of our grandchildren, Matthew, is on the autism spectrum. He's not very social. You know, he struggles with being social, and I think it was last week he was playing with one of the younger grandkids, and we're like, oh, wow, that's, because usually he's like, you know, and one of his little things that he came up with when he was a little bit younger, if we were trying to tell him something, he'd put up his little hand, and he'd say, and he'd turn his face, and he'd say, stop talking to me. That was just what he would do. He'd just stop talking to me. Because the noise, you know, would get to him. He's like, just stop. Don't you want to just do that sometimes to people? Can you just stop talking to me? We all go through these processes, and we tend to withdraw from people. I'm one of those people, in case you didn't know that. I may covered up pretty good. I don't like to be around people when I am going through a struggle or I'm feeling depressed or whatever. And I just feel like saying to everybody, can you just quit talking to me? Stop talking to me. Leave me alone. No, I don't want to hang out with you. Just leave me alone. Now, how many of you are like that? Okay, I'm going to quit talking to you. I'll tell you right now. See, that's just our personality. That's all that is. It's just our personality. That's the way we need that alone time. But we need to be careful that as we do that we don't withdraw from the very people who can be part of the healing process. And so whenever, and I haven't had to go to one in a long time, a funeral, or to do one. But I hate to go to those things because I know people are going to say some of the dumbest things to you, to the family. But I go anyway because I want to be in the presence of Jesus. So as we withdraw from people, the enemy would have us to be alone and to feel when we're alone that we are abandoned. That God has left us, or the church has left us, the church doesn't care, or we say this, nobody cares. We use those words, nobody cares. God doesn't care. Nobody cares. I'm all alone. That's what the devil would have you do when those of us who have that personality trait. We need to be careful that we don't withdraw so much that we begin to feel feelings of abandonment and aloneness, and that we're just completely abandoned by our body. When the word says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Amen. Oh, the never-ending, overwhelming, reckless love of God. He's not going to leave you. He's not going to forsake you. But it's okay if you feel like he has. It's okay when you go through the process of mourning, if you have those feelings like nobody understands what I'm going through, you'd be surprised how many of you actually do. One of the good things of going to support groups is that you'll meet people who have very similar stories. They may have reacted differently, but they're still in the same boat. And everybody will react differently. So what we need to do is when we go through those difficult moments and go through those difficult times, as much as we want to withdraw, as much as we want to walk away from it all, I'm going to tell you, go against that and run towards God. Run to God. Even if you're angry at God, even if you have doubts about God, even if you don't understand why this is happening in your life, run to God. Take your doubts to God. Take your questions to God. Take your confusion to God. Take your pain to God. Yell at God if you have to, if that helps you. Just tell God, help me, God. I don't understand why this is happening. I don't know why you let this person die. I don't know why you let this thing happen to my family. I don't understand it, God. Just run to Him instead of away from Him. And allow Him to embrace you. Allow Him to love on you. You see, because the issue is not being angry at this person or that person or being angry at God, but rather being angry at the situation and what has happened. Because whether we like it or not, there is randomness in the universe. There just is. That's part of the world that God has created. And God has created certain laws of nature. And He's put them in place for our protection. But when we or others go against those very laws of nature, we can be hurt. And so when we go to God, what I believe God is saying to us, when we go to Him with that anger and that confusion and that doubt, is He embraces us and He says to you, I am angry at the situation too. I am angry at the injustice of it all. But one day I will make all things right. One day we will work through this, and one day it's going to be okay. One day this world will be different. But until then, I'm angry with you at the injustice of what has happened. I'm angry at what has happened through nature sometimes. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: God does not give us everything we want, but He does fulfill His promises, leading us along the best and straightest paths to Himself. 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 10, as I get ready to conclude, and I have our praise team come up, he says this. The Apostle Paul is writing about the suffering, the persecution, and he says this: we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Allow that grief and that mourning process to flow through you. Embrace it. Accept it. It's part of life. Go ahead and take that. You can be angry. You can go through those stages, but go through them with God. Let God go through them with you. Embrace Him. Don't shut Him out. Don't shut God's people out. Give yourself permission to grieve. Questions and doubts are a normal part of the grieving process, but in your grief, in your sorrow, in your pain, and in your suffering, turn and run to God. Run and turn to God. Run to His people. And allow, as imperfect as we are, allow the healing process to start. Father, we just love you, Lord. We love you because you're right by our side. Through the injustice of it all, through the unfairness of it all, you are right by our side. You've never left us. You've never abandoned us. And Father, we ask that you pick up the pieces with us as we begin to piece our lives back together. Things may never be the way they were before, God. They may never be the way they were before this trial, before this suffering, before this season of tribulation. They may never be the same, but they could be better, God. Help me pick up the pieces, Lord. Help me walk into healing. It may take a few months, it may take a year, but Father, you're going to be with me that whole time. You're never ending. Overwhelming, reckless love of my Father. We love you, Jesus. We don't understand, but we trust you, God. We don't have all the answers, but we trust you, God. Oh, Father, bind us up and heal us. Bind up our wounds, bandage them up with your precious Holy Spirit. Through your people, heal us and restore us, Father. Restore what the enemy has taken away, that we may sing with joy once again. Every head bowed, praying. Saints are praying this morning. Maybe you're here and you haven't committed your life to Jesus. I'm not one to sugarcoat the Christian life. I tell you as honestly as I know, but it's a life worth having. It's a faith worth having. If you have not made that commitment to Jesus, I want to give you that opportunity this morning to say, I want Jesus to be the Lord of my life. I want him to save me, to radically transform me. Just do that right now where you're at. You don't even have to come up. You don't have to raise your hand. Right there where you are, you can say, Jesus, forgive me of my sins and cleanse my heart.
Entrusted in the ways of man, still know His name.